This is episode 74 of the Fitness and Post podcast. To access the show notes for this episode, please visit fitnessandpost.com/74. I've also created a bonus document to accompany this episode that serves as a guide to help you determine whether or not your next low or no paying job opportunity is right for you. Download your free guide at fitnessandpost.com/74download. My name is Zach Arnold. I'm a film and television editor and the creator of Fitness and Post. I've spent many years working brutally long hours in a dark room and battled numerous health problems due to the sedentary nature of my career, and that's what led me to building Fitness and Post. Whether you work in post-production like me, or if you're a designer, programmer, animator, composer, or anyone working a sedentary job all day, we'll help you learn how to sit less, focus more, eat better, and bring health and wellness back into your life. You spend all day fixing it in post, now it's time for some fitness in post. Hello and welcome to the Fitness and Post podcast, where it is my mission to help you optimize the most powerful operating system that you have, yourself. My guest today is feature film editor Alan Bell, a return guest to the show who was previously on episode 40. Alan has edited such blockbuster films as The Last Three Hunger Games, The Amazing Spider-Man, Water for Elephants, and two of my favorite indie films of all time, 500 Days of Summer and Little Manhattan. In our previous episode, we talked a lot about Alan's habits in the edit bay and how he stays healthy despite the rigors of working on big-budget films. But in this episode, we do a deep dive into the concept of whether or not it's okay to take free work, and if a low or no-paying job comes along that might make sense, what are the criteria to evaluate whether or not it's worth it for your career. But before we get to our interview, I would like to announce that beta enrollment is still open for my online course, Move Yourself, but it's going to be closing April 8th at midnight Pacific time, and the price is going to go up for the next release. So if you're interested in joining and you're hearing this announcement before April 8th, visit fitnessandpost.com/optimize for more info. That's fitnessandpost.com/OPTIMIZE. If you're new to this podcast, Move Yourself is an online learning course, kind of like lynda.com, but for your health, that contains 5 modules and over 25 lessons of educational content that will show you how to sit less, focus more, and become so active at work that you'll never feel guilty for skipping the gym again. And in addition to over 5 hours worth of lessons, the course will also contain over 50 activity videos from certified chiropractors and even a few from yours truly that will help you alleviate the chronic pains associated with being sedentary all day long. Again, if this course interests you, visit fitnessandpost.com/optimize for more info. And if you happen to be listening after April 8th, you can always visit fitnessandpost.com/optimize to get yourself on the waiting list. And now, without further ado, my conversation with Alan Bell. I'm here today with none other than the Alan Bell, who is the editor of such films as The Hunger Games: Catching Fire, Mockingjay Parts 1 and 2, The Amazing Spider-Man, and one of my favorite indie films of all time, 500 Days of Summer, as well as my favorite indie film of all time, Little Manhattan. So, Alan, thank you for being back on the show.
Thanks for having me.
So I had Alan on, I don't remember exactly when, maybe 6 months to a year ago, and we talked all about Alan's habits in the edit room, what he's done to get more energy, get in shape, all these great things, none of which we're going to talk about today, but I will link to that in the show notes. The reason that I wanted to have Alan on the show today was actually inspired by a couple of things. First, it was inspired by a Facebook post that I will go a little bit more in detail about in a couple of minutes, but it was also inspired by conversations that he and I have had offline. So this isn't going to be so much today an interview of Alan Bell as it is just going to be two friends kind of shooting the at the bar kind of a conversation. But the conversation on Facebook was all about the idea of free work. And I'm going to read this verbatim, and because it's public and it's already out there, I can link to it. But the post is as follows. Has anyone ever done an editing gig where they quote unquote hire you, but ask you to edit your first project for free to make sure that you're a quote unquote proper fit? Is this company worth working for? And what shocked me is the responses in this thread. There are over 218 responses, and this is a thread on the Avid Editors of Facebook. So if you're an editor and you're a member of this group, you can read all of the responses. But there is just some vicious, vitriolic responses, not to the woman that posted it, mind you, to the people that would ask for something like this. And I know that you and I have pretty specific ideas about taking free work and whether or not it's worth it. And basically the overarching response is absolutely not. This is ridiculous. Don't ever do it. And I think you and I are kind of a little bit more in the middle of the spectrum, where I personally believe, and you can correct me if you disagree, but I believe there are places where taking free work is a tremendously beneficial move for your career, but it really feels like everybody's saying all free work is you being taken advantage of. So let's just kind of use that as a jumping off point.
Yeah, well, I do think that sometimes taking free work is the right thing for your career, particularly when your career is just burgeoning. You know, when you're first starting off, it makes sense. Now, in this particular instance, the way that the post is read, I don't think it's a good idea, because to me it sounds, and hopefully I'm not contradicting myself, because I can't remember what I replied on those posts, but I don't think it's a good idea, because this is a situation where they're basically, instead of just coming straight out and saying, hey, we're not going to pay you, they're saying, once you do it, if we like it, then, maybe you're the right fit, then maybe we'll pay you. To me, that feels, it's sort of a dishonest approach to just saying, hey, I don't have money to pay you, but in doing this, you'll be A, building a relationship with me, and B, you'll be getting something that you can put on your resume and be getting, some experience. So, I don't, in this instance, it's a little bit weird because of the way that they're, writing it. It sounds like they're really looking for somebody who is a little bit naive. Now, I don't know what the actual original post said in its, verbatim. I know what the person wrote that the post said. But in terms of what you just read, that doesn't sound like a good freebie job to me, only because it just doesn't seem like the people are being that upfront. It sounds like they want to get their work done and then not have to pay for it without telling you that they're not planning on paying for it, which to me, that doesn't sound honest. There's some red flags in that email. I think that I also, I don't know about you, but I feel like there's a tendency on Facebook posts and Twitter and just, any type of digital forum for people to really kind of just like, jump on the tackle and just pile up on these things that they see as, either offensive or missing some moral compass, or, a little bit of, people tend to kind of overreact. I mean, to the extent to where I think they even miss some important aspects, because a lot of times when people are asking you to work for free, what they're really asking you to do is to work for some form of deferred payment. I remember shortly after this post, there was another post that somebody posted up, and it started to get hammered, and it did get hammered in some of the same ways that this one did. And it was a situation where they were saying, hey, I can't remember the exact specifics. It was like, we have $100 a day and we'll give you participation points. And the person who put this post up was like, well, I, sent this big email to the company or the people who wanted to pay deferred, saying, well, how many participation points, is that brownie point? Like, they didn't understand what participation points were, meaning if the movie sees a profit, you will get a percentage. You will be able to participate in the final profit of the film. Now, even if the film never makes a profit, failing to see the fact that you can actually write out a contract for yourself that states that you got paid X amount plus participation points, that's not somebody asking you to work for free. That's somebody who's actually saying, hey, we have a little money to pay you, and if we can, we're going to pay you more. And on top of that, we're going to give you the ability to put this precedent in place for yourself that shows that when you work for low amounts of money, you get participation points in films. Only a few editors in Hollywood have that kind of thing in their contract. And when people are just piling up on they want you to work for free, to me, it's very short-sighted. And I think that, I don't know, in Hollywood, it's not the same as going to work for McDonald's or some giant corporation. I mean, yes, we're working for corporations many times. Many times we're just working for, people who pull together sums of money and are trying to make their movie. And you can't treat every film and every call for services as this is the man trying to keep me down. You have to really look at, these people are trying to make movies or films, TV, webisodes, whatever they're trying to do. Some people have money, some people don't. Even the people who are in it for the money are doing it because it's a labor of love 90% of the time. And I think it's our job to try to find those people and work with them and offer them services that nobody else can, or distinguish ourselves in some way and build relationships so that we are sought after editors.
Yes, I definitely am in a similar mindset where I think there are a lot of opportunities where free work makes sense. And I have done more than my share of free work to get where I am today, some of which paid off, some of which didn't. But I think that what I really wanted to do today was not just kind of, sit here and talk about free work and, people want you to work for free or they don't want you to work for free. And is it worth it or not? I actually want to break down kind of a simple matrix for all the kind of different scenarios that we can brainstorm for where you can be offered free work, where it makes sense for your career and where it doesn't. So the first one that we're talking about is this Facebook thread that kind of inspired this conversation. And it's the idea of, hey, we'd like you to do a test to see if you're a good fit. And like I said in this Facebook post, overwhelmingly, people are screaming and yelling, like you said, all caps, red flag, stay away. They're trying to rip you off. Hundreds and hundreds of comments just like this. And I think to a certain extent, they're probably right. And I agree with you that this is not a good fit. And as you go much deeper into this thread, you see the woman that posted it ended up saying to the person that was trying to hire her, no, thank you, I'm not going to do this. And I guess the woman responded rather angrily and was like, well, I never actually asked you to work for free. I'm going to pay you. But at the same time, you have to understand that I'm taking all of the risk on you. And I kind of laughed at that. And then I saw a post from somebody else that said, yeah, that's kind of funny. All the risk is on you. It's something called hiring people. That's what hiring people means. You're taking a risk. You're assuming, based on their qualifications and their resume, their past experience, and their demo reel, that they're going to work for you. Therefore, you take the risk. You pay them X amount of dollars for the work. And if it doesn't work out, you fire them. So in this case, I agree. This is not the place where taking free work makes sense. And there are a lot of people that said that it's exploitive. And they even go so far as to tell some of their own stories saying, oh yeah, I did something like this. And then they ended up taking my work that I did for free, airing it, profiting from it. I never got paid. These are all instances where free work is a horrible idea. What I want to do is try and find some instances where free work is a good idea. And I can go through a couple of my own experiences.
Yeah, and I'll do that as well.
I have two, and when I say free, I also want to put in parentheses free/grossly underpaid, because there are jobs where you will get paid, but it's very, very little compared to what you should be paid for for providing the equivalent service fully paid. And they're kind of in the same category for me. So the first instance that I want to talk about is one that is very, very low pay, but was not for free. And that was my first independent feature film gig that I took. God, it's killing me. I think it was 11 years ago now. Oh my God, that just terrified me thinking about how long ago that was. But anyway, I was 2 years out of college. I had been a trailer editor for 2 years, was very successful in moving up the ladder and getting paid good money. I had actually been offered a couple of jobs at bigger trailer firms for 6 figures a year, which just was more than my parents made. And I was like, oh my God, this is crazy. But I didn't want to do trailers. I wanted to get into feature films. And I had found a connection through a friend of a friend to work on this really low budget indie film. And when I say low budget now people are making indie films for $20,000 and a stick of gum. The budget for this was like $1 million, but it was personally financed by a producer from his own money. He was literally leveraging his kids' college funds in his house and putting mortgages up to finance this film. And they said, we can pay you $600 a week all in to work on this film and help us get more funding by putting together sales reels and all kinds kinds of other stuff. And I jumped at the chance to do this because it was my chance to work with real Hollywood producers, and it was my chance to build a reel of long form work. But I was taking, I think it was about an 80% pay cut. So for the work I was doing, which was editing a feature film, I was getting paid about $100 a day, except I was working about 14 to 16 hours a day. And I did this job for a long, long time. But I'm glad that you'd mentioned the idea of participation points. I had a contract that stated that I had deferred pay that would be based on what at the time would have been my quote unquote full rate. But I also got participation points. And about a year and a half or 2 years later, after working on this film, and I was still working on it, I was on this project forever. The film ended up getting purchased by Fox Searchlight for $4.75 million. And I did end up getting about 20% of my deferment. So I had done this work for a long time, grossly underpaid, really, crazy long hours. And it was actually during this project that I had my kind of suicidal depression breakdown. And that was the instigator for everything that started with Fitness in Post. But with the deferred pay, like you said, it is a contract. I ended up getting a check like 6 months to a year later for like $10,000. So this was an instance where I took a job for a ridiculous amount of pay below what I should have been paid. And because it was so low pay, I was also my own assistant. So I didn't have an assistant editor. So I was doing all my own assistant work, and I was cutting the film at the same time. And I ended up also doing the theatrical trailers for the film all within the same package. So there was certainly a little bit of exploitation, but for the most part, I was treated very well. And we actually have a mutual friend in common in the producer that hired me, who's Stephen Wolf. So this was an instance where me making this leap of faith ended up paying off, building contacts. It's how I met you. You and I met through Stephen Wolf and through a project that you and I were both interviewing for. So this was an instance where it absolutely made sense and it paid off long term for my career. But short term, anybody would have looked at the two options and said, are you crazy? You can get paid six figures to edit big budget trailers, or you can work on some no-name feature for $600 a week. If I posted that on Facebook 12 years ago, people would have screamed at me.
Yeah, they would have. But, here's the thing, is that not only did you get paid, but you also got paid with the opportunity to work in a feature narrative environment, which you didn't have previously to that. So, you were working in trailers, and Stephen Wolf, I'm assuming he was the producer on it, he was basically saying, look, I think this guy can do it. Now, Stephen is one of the most frugal producers out there. He makes movies with small budgets for a price. He's very smart about how he makes them. He's also a man of his word. He's an honest person. He's a very nice person. So, this is a guy where when you go to work for him, he's going to make sure that, that pencil that you have is only an inch long before he buys you another one, but he will give you a writing implement. At the same time, so he doesn't waste any money at all, but he does what he says he's going to do. And so in that, that's why you got your deferred check at the end of it, because once the movie saw profit, you actually, were paid some of what they could afford to pay you, which I think is remarkable, because many deferred payments, people never do get paid. But what you're saying brings me to the point that I want to make, which is simply that when you're working for free, you're never really working for free. I mean, you should never take a free job if you're not going to get something out of it, right? So like for me, it doesn't make sense for me to go do somebody's indie film for free unless, there's something that I can gain from it. They're going to get all my services. What am I going to get in return? So either it needs to be participation profit, producing, something that I'm going to earn, experience from. So like, my first freebie job was a situation where I came into the film industry with absolutely no experience at all. I didn't know which end was up if I looked at a film strip. I didn't know which was the emulsion side, which was the back acetate side, which was the top or the bottom. I knew nothing about film and filmmaking. So when I first got my job, I was asking people for how can I get in the film industry? And everybody said, well, you can either go to film school. When you go to film school, you're going to come out and you're going to be looking for a job, and you're going to find a job as an apprentice. If you want to be an editor, you're going to have to get a job as an apprentice. Maybe you won't even get that. You'll get a PA job. And most of those jobs are going to be very low paying or no paying at all. So you could do that, or you could just go out and knock on doors and find a job and just tell people, hey, I'll work for free. I want to learn. So that's what I did. I just started calling people up. I talked to a woman named Nancy Beta, who's married to Kent Beta. She was cutting a movie over at Roger Corman's place over in Venice. And she was working next to a guy named Norman Holland, who was cutting, at that time, a movie that was made with the leftover budget from the movie Nancy was cutting. So Nancy was cutting Big Bad Mama 2. He was cutting this movie called Daddy's Boys, which was made shot over like a weekend or something on like a $20,000 budget. And they had absolutely no money, but she got me to Norman, and I said, hey, I'll work for free. Just teach me, let me come work. And I worked for him for, I want to say it was about 8 weeks, completely for free. 14-hour days, 5 days a week on some weeks, some days was 6 and 7 days. Learning how to file trims, just learning that job of what an assistant was in a film-based cutting room at that time, because this is before nonlinear had taken Hollywood by storm. And so what I got from that was the experience. He got somebody who was eager. And, it paid off because Norman is a really great guy. If anybody doesn't know who Norman is, he's a USC film professor. He's cut a lot of great movies. So he brought me on to cut some other movies to work with him on some other movies. Eventually, the last movie he and I did together was Heathers. So, I took that job and I was working for free, but I really wasn't working for free because in my mind, I was working for experience. And I think that at the end of the day, really, whether money's involved or not, if you're working for extremely low pay or no pay at all, there should be some other factor that you're getting out of the experience. Otherwise, I don't think it makes sense to work for free. They're taking a chance on you, or basically saying, hey, we will help you get this experience. You need to be in a position where that experience is meaningful,
Yeah, I think that's a huge, huge point is, there's a difference between free and not getting paid money, because you can walk away with a tremendous amount of worth from the job that you're doing. It just is a bit of self shameless promotion before we move forward. I do want to mention that I have 2 podcast episodes with Norman Holland, who's one of my favorite human beings on the planet. And I know he listens. So hello, Norman. So episodes 56 and 57, Norman and I spent 2 full hours going into how you can advance in your post-production career or break in. And I also, since you were talking about film school, did a very popular episode with film editor Eddie Hamilton all about whether or not you need film school. And you two are both perfect examples of people that didn't go to film school. And based on your resume, you seem to be doing okay. So for anybody that wants to go deeper down that rabbit hole, we can do it there. But I love everything that you said, especially about the idea that you're getting some worth out of the job, even though you're not getting paid. So I want to use another example from my past. This is something that I did my junior year of college, where I had decided that I really wanted to learn graphic design and learn After Effects. It's not something that I wanted to do for a living, but I was really thinking, and remember, this would have been 15 or 16 years ago when After Effects was like version 3, the original version 3, had only been out a couple of years. But I really wanted to learn it. I wanted to do motion graphic design and title design, and I wasn't really interested in visual effects or compositing, but I loved motion graphics. So I went to a company in Southfield, Michigan, right outside of Detroit, that did all of the graphic design and editorial work for all the big auto companies. So all the national Ford commercials, Chevy commercials, and whatnot. And I had a random connection, and I emailed them and said, hey, I'd love to come in for an interview and just talk to you about some form of an internship. They said, all right. They were kind of doing it as a favor. And I basically walked in and said, you don't have to pay me $1. You don't even have to create a 1-page sheet that says that I can get credit for this. All I want is to learn. I will come in here for 20 hours a week during the summer. I will get lunches for you guys. I will do any kind of basic tasks that you may have around the office. And all I'm asking in return is a workstation where I can spend all day long on After Effects. And if I have questions, I can go to somebody and just pick their brain if they're not busy or with a client. And they just had this look on their face like, yeah, that sounds great. And that's what I did my whole summer is I just sat on a workstation with a book and I learned After Effects 20 hours a week my entire summer. And I had flame artists right literally over my shoulder where I could just talk to a flame artist and say, hey, I'm trying to do this thing. I don't understand it. Can you show me? They loved it. We all became really good friends. It was really fun. I got their lunches every day that I was there. If they needed some other random task, I would do it. And they even let me do some basic work on design work that went into their commercials. I didn't get paid a cent. I didn't even get college credit, but the amount of education that I walked away from that internship still brings value to my life to this day.
Right. I mean, you probably learned more in that one summer than you would have had you taken an After Effects class in school.
Absolutely. I walked away with so much knowledge of After Effects. When I came out here to LA to start working, I was doing motion graphics and titles that were finishing in the theatrical trailers within 6 months of graduation, working with editors that had been doing this for 5 or 10 years saying, how did you do that? Like they loved the motion graphic work that I was doing, and it's part of the reason that I was promoted to trailer editor within 5 months of graduation because of my motion graphic skills. They saved a ton of money because I was able to do the motion graphics and they didn't have to farm out to other houses. So it's brought tremendous value to my life.
Right. I think one of the things that happens online, because things tend to be black and white online. Everything for some reason seems to be looked at through this filter that's like that's either good or evil. There aren't a lot of gray areas, and I think that a lot of people get upset and offended when they get to a certain point in their careers, or they're at a point where they feel like I shouldn't have to work for free. And if you feel that way, that's fine. I mean, I certainly feel that way at this point in my career. People ask me to work for free. The answer is always no. I might do something pro bono for a worthy cause. If I've had a bunch of friends who have died from cancer over the years, and if a cancer organization came to me and said, hey, we need some help with something, I might be inclined to help them, and I'd be doing that. What I'd be getting out of that is a sense of self-worth and well-being, and the idea that I'm helping. But I think that most people get to a point to where they feel like I shouldn't have to work for free. And when someone says, hey, will you do this project for free? It offends them. And so then they rail against it. And I think that if that's where you're at, then you shouldn't be working for free. The answer for you in that case is no. But it's not necessarily correct to say that it's no for everybody else, because there are, varying levels of expertise. There are varying levels of you can be a great editor, but only worked in trailers, for instance, or, just done in-house corporate videos, and you want to break into narrative. Well, it might be worthwhile to work for free on a small, webisode or some sort of narrative, web-based project or YouTube project or vanity project or something for an actor, or to go out and cut some actors' reels if you're working in-house corporate stuff and you want to get into trailers. Things like that. And I guess I'm just saying this because it seems like everybody sort of thinks that the plan they've made for themselves, and maybe you and I are just as guilty of this, is the only way to go. And I kind of feel like you really have to sort of take stock of like where you are in your career, where you are emotionally, where you are, in terms of what's required of you. Do you have a family? Is your overhead enormous? And that brings me to another thing when I think about overhead, is that sometimes working for free just isn't an option no matter what your situation is, because you don't have time. And that's why I think that in this freelance world, we need to make sure that we maintain a low enough overhead so that A, we can take long periods without work, which allows us to be choosy about which types of jobs we do. Because when you go into a job interview, hopefully the only way you can enter it with strength is if you're interviewing the person that is interviewing you as well. You should be asking yourself, do I want to work with this person? Do I feel like I'm going to be served and I'm going to be able to serve them in this situation? And you should be doing that when you're going for a low pay or a no pay job, as well as when you're going for a high paid job.
Well, one of the things that you just brought up that I thought that just totally sparked my brain was when you said the word webisode, because this brings me to the next of my examples. And it's funny, the more that we're going down this rabbit hole, the more I'm realizing, holy crap, I have done a ton of free work in my career. Like, I cannot believe how much free work I keep remembering that I did years ago. But anyway, when you brought up the word webisode, that was the turning point in my entire career. This was about 7 years ago now. This would have been, so 7 or 8 years ago. This was in 2008. I was unemployed. It was the first streak of unemployment I had ever had because I went off and I got married. And up until the point I got married in 2007, I'd never had a day where I didn't have work unless it was by choice. I had been freelancing for a long time, always had worked, took it for granted. And then I said, I'm going to take 3 weeks off, go on my honeymoon, take a little break, ease into marriage, came back and nobody had work. I'm like, well, wait a second. What do you mean you don't have work? It was just, I just assumed I should always be working. And it started this long streak of 2 years where I could barely find any paid work. And I was in very, very much financial dire straits. And on Craigslist, of all places, I found this ad for a web series. And I'd been responding to Craigslist ads and Media Match ads, like just the worst stuff, because I was desperate. But I found this web series that these two guys were doing named Mark Gant and Jesse Warren. And they were doing something that was very slick, kind of looked like an Ocean's 11 type show. It's called The Bannon Way. And they had $1,000 all in to cut the web series, which at the time was just 2 pilot episodes. So it was maybe 10 to 15 minutes worth plus a trailer. And I had another editor working for me at the time. I had a small boutique post company. And I paid that other editor the $1,000, the whole check, so he could edit the trailer while I was editing the pilot scene. So this was work that I did 100% for free personally. Even though they were paying $1,000, I saw zero cents of that, and it actually ended up costing me money based on the facility time and all those other things. And I did the 2 pilot episodes. He did the trailer. They shopped it around. And it took about a year or a year and a half. And then Sony ended up buying the web series. And it ended up, I don't know what the exact budget was, but it was probably, I don't know, somewhere between 1 and 2 million. And it turned out to be the most successful web series that's not only Sony had ever done, it was on Crackle, but it was the biggest breakout web series ever in the history of web series, which clearly there's not a huge history of. But because I ended up getting that job and that job was paid, I used that as my calling card to get burn notice. So I went from a Craigslist ad making $0.0 and I had to play the long game. But in less than 2 years, I ended up on burn notice and breaking into the much more professional side of my TV editing career.
See, working for free does have its benefits.
Yeah, and it totally paid off. And then the other example that I thought about that I wasn't even thinking about talking about, but is I wanted to hit on your point even further about the idea of setting yourself up financially. And this is a conversation I think that you and I had like 3 or 4 years ago on that post-show podcast. I went through another situation, and this was before I got married, I believe. I can't remember the timeline of any of this anymore. All the free work is just starting to get mixed up in my head. But speaking of Stephen Wolf, the second feature film that I did for him, I did 100% for free. So if somebody's saying, oh, well, you got paid $600 a week for that other one, that's not that bad. The next one was 100% for free, and I did it for 8 months straight. So it was an 8-month job for no pay. And somebody's thinking, well, how could you even do that? It's because, like you said, I had set aside money from my high-paid trailer work. And what I was doing was I was going back and forth, and I would occasionally take 2 or 3 weeks off the film. I would go and cut either featurettes or trailers or something that I was getting paid a full freelance rate, which is very, very well paid. And I would just sock that in the bank, and I would keep my expenses extremely low, basically living... I was living in an apartment, but I had no extravagances. I wasn't spending any money, even though I was making a lot. So I could edit this feature film for 8 months for $0.0. And the payoff for that was Steven and I developed such a good relationship that I ended up getting an interview on 500 Days of Summer, which kind of comes full circle to how you and I met each other. So that was another huge payoff to taking free work and having another feature film on my resume.
Right. And Steve's the kind of guy who, when he can pay you, he will pay you.
Yeah.
He will try to get you on those movies that he's producing. relationships is really what you're trying to build. And obviously, you don't want to just have relationships with people who are exploiting you. So, they need to be solid relationships. That's why I say you need to interview the people that are interviewing you just as much, as it works the other way around, so that you're, making sure that you're the right fit and they're the right fit for you. And having flexibility is the only way that that can happen.
Yeah, and I think that's an excellent point that so many people overlook, that I myself have overlooked and gotten overzealous about projects just because I needed the work or it sounded like an interesting project and I didn't interview them. And when you're in that interview, you have to ask some questions to make sure that it's the right fit for what you want as well. Because you may be thinking, oh yeah, well, I don't have a lot of money in the bank account and I really need work right now, so I'm just going to take this. But sometimes the money is not worth the trade-off for the nightmare that the job may end up being.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because you go into an interview thinking, I really want this job. I have to nail this. I hope they love me. And that isn't necessarily the best way to go into an interview. What I try to do is I go into an interview thinking to myself, well, I really like the material. And I really like, when I look at these people on paper whom I've never met before, I really like the work that they've done in the past. Gee, I hope this is the right fit for me. I hope they are nice people. I hope that it's a job that I'm going to want to do after this interview. So, they're looking for signs that in me that are going to make them want to work with me. And I'm also looking for the same thing in reverse. Because the one thing that I have learned is that if you're in a position, editing is enormously stressful. So if you're in a position that's a stressful position on a movie with politics, just the fact that the material is great isn't always enough to make you want to get up in the morning and go through that washing machine again, because it can be pretty brutal. It's just like tumbling around. Studio politics can be enormous at times. And you better like the people and want to work with the people in order to get into the ring with them at times. And so I think it's really important. And the only way that's possible is if you keep your overhead down low enough so that you can turn jobs down that you may even want, that on the surface looked great. But when you met the people, you're like, oh, I don't really want to work with this person. I don't think we gel well. Or, I remember an instance where I turned down a job just based on somebody's reputation. I was out of work and I took the kids to Knott's Berry Farm. I had my mom there with me and I was just complaining to her about, man, I got to get a job. As I was buying, the $12 soda for my kid or the, popcorn or whatever. It's like, I got to get a job. This is killing me. I think I hadn't worked for, 2 or 3 months or something. And my agent called me and said that Michael Mann wanted to meet me. And, Michael Mann has a pretty long reputation. And I know a lot of people have worked with him and enjoyed it and gotten along with him well. But I've heard, more intense stories. And it just doesn't seem like the kind of environment that I would thrive in. And so I just said, yeah, I don't think I want to take that meeting. The more I asked, the more it was apparent that it wasn't the right situation for me. It was I think a Wednesday. They'd started shooting on Monday. They wanted me to, be there at 6 p.m. that day on Wednesday to meet him so that if he liked me, I could start the very next day. And everything that I'd heard about Michael Mann just led me to believe that he and I weren't going to be a great fit. Maybe he's the nicest guy in the world, but there's a lot of people talking about him and not everyone's saying great things. So I just turned it down. And after I hung up the phone, my mom's like, you were just telling me how you needed a job. And I'm like, yeah, I need a job. But I need a job with somebody that I think that I'll enjoy working with. And I don't want to be in a situation where I'm working with someone that I'm not happy with, that I'm not able to do my best work. A, I'm an editor, so I never quit. And B, if I'm on a show that I'm unhappy in, when that show where I might be happy comes around, I won't be available. And my mom was just scratching her head because she has the mentality of you take the work that's there and you're just thankful for it. And in Hollywood, you can't do that. You have to take the work that's good with good people so that you can thrive, because we work so hard. If we're not happy while we're working, then what's the point? Because 90% of our lives is spent in the cutting room with people that, we have to interact with in very close quarters. And if they're not people that you want to be around, then I highly recommend finding someone else to work with.
So then along the lines of what we're talking about with doing the job interview, making sure you're working for the right people, if somebody's listening to this saying, oh, I never thought about that concept, what should I ask? Are there like a couple of stock questions in your head that you're like, if you're going to be interviewing them without sounding like you're interviewing them, what are a couple of good questions to ask that director or that producer?
When you're working for free, those might be slightly different questions, but the types of questions I'm asking in paid interviews on movies are, I'm trying to find out if the director and the producers in the studio if they're all in alignment, in terms of the type of film that they're making. So, I have a take on the script and the material. And so when I'm talking to the director, I'm asking them questions, one, to find out if we're in alignment in terms of, how we feel the movie is. And if we're not in alignment, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because often their interpretation of the material is something that I may not have thought of, which, may actually broaden the appeal. But in the case where you find that the director is already at odds with the studio and filming hasn't even begun, in terms of the tone of the material or, things of that nature, that is usually an indicator that you're going to be in for some serious politics down the road. One, you're going to have competing forces about what type of film it's going to be, and that's not a position of clarity. And when you're making a movie, you really do have to have a clear point of view in order for it to be good, in my opinion. It's a lot harder to make something when you have differing points of view and they're both equally struggling to get it made. It's just much harder. So those are things that I'm kind of, questions I'm asking are in subtle ways helping me kind of suss out, like, are they in firm agreement or not? I mean, even to the point where I have been somewhat blunt with directors, particularly on movies where there are multiple producers and maybe they're from very, multiple studios, where I'm just like, so how is your relationship with this studio and this director? Are they, is everybody trying to make the same film? Are you disagreeing in areas? And in most cases, they'll be very forthright and tell me how they feel. And that at least gives me information so I can gauge what type of environment the film is going to be in as we get further down. Because usually these things, I've been on movies where politics have been very, very intense through pre-production, and I was not aware of it until we came back from shooting and got to the director's cut and suddenly found out that, the studio was not on board with any of the choices the director had been making throughout the shoot, and now they were going to get their payback. And that is not the position you want to be in as an editor. It's not good for the movie, and B, it's not good for your stress levels.
Yeah, and I agree with all of that. And what I would also add is a really good question, and this is a conversation that I just recently had in a job interview, is understanding the process of the person that you're going to be working with the most. So if that's a feature film, that's the director. If that's TV, it's probably the showrunner or the executive producer. And I will often be asked, well, what is your process for editing? And what I will often do is kind of reverse that and say, well, I would love to know how you approach the editing process and how you look at it, because I've worked with producers in the past that do not care about the editing process. To them, it's an afterthought. It's a nuisance. They would rather just be either on set or in the writer's room. And that can have a very taxing effect on, like you said, your stress levels and your day-to-day lifestyle, because things are constantly behind and you're not able to focus on the work properly. So what I've done, I've been very bold and very honest in meetings, and I'll say to them, listen, I'm somebody that likes to work in a very efficient manner. I will always meet my deadlines, but at the same time, I have expectations that when things are delivered, I'm going to get a response back and we're going to have a relationship. And more importantly, if you're looking for an editor that is going to assemble your dailies and give you all of the material, and then you basically tell them how you want it and the way that you want it shaped, and the editor kind of becomes a set of hands at a keyboard, I call them a keyboard monkey, I'm not the right fit for you, and I don't think that hiring me makes sense. I'm just going to tell you, you shouldn't hire me, because that's not what you're going to get. What you get with me is somebody that's going to bring something new to the project. I am very opinionated. I am very honest. I'm very respectful. but my allegiance is to the project, not to any specific person. So that's what you're going to get with me. And I want to understand your take on the process as well, because I've worked with directors and producers that post is just kind of a nuisance. And those are not projects I want to be a part of. So I need to understand how they approach the day-to-day process.
Yeah, I think that's right. I also think you have to know what your personal temperament is. I mean, I've certainly worked with a lot of other editors, and many of them are different than me in that they would prefer to be just kind of left alone. I find that that's not a very efficient way to work for me. So, like in many cases, I've worked on movies where the director just doesn't spend any time in the cutting room. And instead, they look at cuts and then they give me notes. And that's fine. I can work that way. I find it to be highly inefficient because when a director gives me a note that is maybe a good idea on paper, but in reality, once you start down that path, isn't a good idea. When they're in the room with you, you go 3 cuts down that path and it's very obvious to everybody in the room that this is not going to work. You can discard that and move on to the next solution. When you're sitting in the room alone, you have to continue down that path for a lot longer than you would have needed to otherwise. And I find that very frustrating when I actually have to polish things that don't work because I know it's going to get sent out and I'm not going to be in the room with them. And this is more true of directors that you're still building a relationship with, directors that maybe you haven't worked with previously. They need to know that you're really putting your back into it. And so you're often finishing things that don't work so that they can see that you put the effort in to make it work. And, I like to be in a room with the director so that we can discover and collaborate on these things together so that I'm not spinning my wheels trying to fix something that's never going to work. Other editors like to just get those notes and be left alone and maybe feel more comfortable just, going 3 or 4 cuts down and sending it off and saying, this doesn't work, so I did this instead. I really think knowing what your temperament is also going to benefit you when it comes down to asking those questions.
Yeah, I think those are all excellent points. And I hope that at this point in the show, for anybody that has been thinking to themselves, well, I would never take free work. I hope you've now seen that there are plenty of different options available where you might not be getting paid money, but you're going to be getting paid in something. So really the question is there value coming from this, whether it's monetary, whether it's a connection, and networking may be infinitely more valuable in the long term than getting paid whatever your rate might be. But now what I want to do to close out the show is we're going to go to the best job listing in the history of job listings. I'm going to read through this. This would be an example of one of those that you probably don't want to take. But I don't think if anybody had written this as a fictional job listing, it would have been as good as this one is. So I'm going to read through this pretty much verbatim. And I just want to get your take on this. And I already know what your take is going to be, but I think it's important for people to read this because they can think, oh, wow, he got the Bannon way on Craigslist. So that means that there are great opportunities on Craigslist. There are. But they're also unicorns. You have to be very careful about what you take and what you don't. So I'm going to read through this. So bear with me. It's going to take a few minutes, but every bit of this is absolute gold. So this is for a sizzle reel. It says Reality Doc TV. The rate is low budget, so it's $150 a day for a 12-hour day. So this is not even a free job. You are actually getting paid. So $150 for a 12-hour day. Need a solid, seasoned editor with graphics, producer, and editing abilities. We are an established production company with many Emmy-nominated producers and cameramen. This is a sizzle, so we are a little pressed on the budget. We can pay $150 a day with the possibility of working on the show when it sells. Ooh, possibility of working on the show that was paying me nothing. Anyway, I'll stop the commentary because I could do that for an hour. I know it is low, but we also have other sizzle reels that we need cut. So if you do great on this, we can keep you busy for a couple of months. Here's where it starts to get good. Qualifications. Need to be a self-starter. Have major network credits. Be able to work weekends and nights. A team player. Have passion for this project. Know the Avid like the back of your hand. And I just want to remind you before I go further, this is paying $150 a day for a 12-hour day. Be able to make graphics in After Effects and Photoshop and knowledge of Maya is a plus. Also, if you know web design, that is a plus as well. I can't even get through this with a straight face, and I'm not even to the good part yet. Be able to work fast and efficiently over long hours. Editors with loan out companies preferred, and this means they're also asking you for your equipment. Be able to troubleshoot the bay. We have been having some crashes lately. Be able to work 10 to 12 hour days minimum. I'm still not done. It gets better. So the project. A sizzle reel for a major network. I can't be more specific at the moment, but I will give you more info once hired. We are so busy, so we won't have a string out. But I'll have an AP, meaning an associate producer, talk you through it. Mostly it is a blank canvas with some detailed story points from us. This is a great opportunity for a seasoned editor to put on a producer's cap and work on a project that allows you to have fun and be creative. We will give feedback daily and make sure that we are on the same page. I still haven't gotten to the best part, but just to recap, $150 a day for a 12-hour day. You have to provide some of your own equipment, have a loan out, have major network credits. You're going to do producing, you're going to do editing, graphics and After Effects and Photoshop, and hopefully Maya, and web design. So I just want to make sure that we've covered all that. This is where it gets amazing. This is a deadline by the end of next week, so nights and weekends might be required. Also, we don't have all the footage in, so you might need to do some transcoding. We can't pay for the downtime during the transcode, but you're more than welcome to leave and come back. We will assign 24-hour access to your key card. Here's the kicker. Here it comes. This is an important doc about the climate of foreign labor forces and the abuse of overworked, underpaid workers. We and the network are highly excited about this project and really want this to be something special.
Okay, now you actually believe that that's real?
I do.
Okay,
I actually believe that this is real.
And I just went, okay, very, very clever. I don't think it's real.
I believe that it is. That's my feeling. I actually tried to look it up and find more information, but because it was on a paid job site, I couldn't find more information. I actually believe this is real. But here's the point. Even if it's not real, there are enough job listings in the world on these job listing sites that I have to question whether or not it could be real. It's not so outlandish that automatically you're thinking, there's no way this is real. There are plenty of people that believe it is.
Right. There are so many red flags there that, that's clearly not, if it is real, the expectations are that they're getting a superhero editor for $150 a day.
I just want to say that based on your resume, as far as your level of expertise and experience, I've never met an editor that has the technical capabilities that you have, as far as your ability to not only edit story, but also do visual effects and compositing. Like, you are way overqualified to just be called an editor. And you are not qualified for this job. You don't have the skills that this job is asking for at $150 a day. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't believe you.
I have a lot of them, but I think I'd really suffer when it came time to do the transcoding.
Well, not only that, but do you know web design really well?
I don't know really well, but I can definitely do it. I'm not an expert in web design. I'm not an expert in Maya. So I can do 3D modeling and animation, but not in Maya. I use different programs. But, I've made websites. I mean, I could certainly go there and go, hey, I could probably do a lot of the stuff you want, not in 12 hours a day. You have to pay me more than $12.50 an hour if you want me to do all this. I just look at that. There's just so many red flags. Like, okay, so the deadline's a week from now and the show may not be shot yet. Like, so there may be some transcode. Like, it just sounds to me like just a joke, especially when I get to the kicker. It just sounds like a joke. And here's the thing. If it's not a joke, it is a joke. And if I was inexperienced, the reality is they're saying that they're going to pay you something. So they want something for that money. But the pay is so low that for them to expect you to meet all this criteria is ridiculous. And, who wants to work for ridiculous people?
Yeah. And For me, again, it really is irrelevant whether or not this is actually real, because it is so close to real job listings that I think that's irrelevant. But
Right.
one of the most common things that you'll see on these job listings is, with the possibility of working on the show when it sells, we also have more work down the pipe, great opportunity to build a long-lasting relationship. All of these things are the catchphrases for producers that want to exploit every ounce of you and throw you away.
Yeah, they are. Because basically, most people who are asking you to work for free are asking you to work for free or for low pay because A, they don't have much money, and they recognize that you're going to be doing them a favor. And so they also recognize that that you may not be the Jerry Greenberg of their particular format. There's going to be a learning curve for you as well, potentially. So they're never going to be saying you have to be, have these huge resumes, with network TV or this or that, unless they're really looking for something that doesn't exist. And most people who are looking for something that don't exist, I mean, when you set that kind of criteria out and then you hire somebody, and chances are, if that is a real job, they found somebody and they hired them, and that person didn't have all those, all that criteria.
Do you think?
Yeah, right. But that person was probably made to think like, wow, they believe in me. The people who take these types of jobs are people who they're desperate for the money, because they're not in a secure situation where they can turn down this sort of work. They're going from paycheck to paycheck, and they're in a position where it's easier for them to be exploited. So you have a producer who's, more of a predator than an actual real producer who's just looking to fill that share. And like, yeah, we'll give you more work down the road. We're more than happy to continue to exploit you for as long as we possibly can. Once they've burnt you out, then they'll throw their ad back up again. But, those aren't the kinds of scenarios that we're talking about. Like, that's why you have to be diligent. If you're going to work for free or for low pay, you got to suss it out. It has to be somebody who will appreciate what you're doing for them and that you'll be able to get something out of it. And, those kinds of catchphrases, you're absolutely right. You'll be able, this job could extend. It's like, okay, that's great. It's not because you can't afford it. It's because this is what you want to pay for somebody long term.
It's funny that you brought up catchphrases, because that's the last thing that I wanted to mention. There's this meme that has gone around, and it's perfectly applicable to what we're saying right now. It's at the top of it, it says film industry terms. And I'm just going to read through some of these because I think that these are the giant red flags. So obviously this is humorous memes, but film industry terms: collaboration equals no pay. Assistant equals no pay. Seeking film student equals no pay. Micro budget equals no pay. Food and IMDb credits equals no pay. We have some A-listers signed on, no pay. Really simple shoot equals no pay. We'll be shopping this project to major distributors equals no pay. Like, it just goes on and on and on. I can actually put a link to this meme in the show notes as well. But these are the kinds of things that when you see them, you just run for the hills. And the other thing that I want to link to as well, I don't know if you've seen this floating around, but there's a viral video recently that was created of this guy going around to different businesses where he was asking them for free work, like going to a picture framer or going to a restaurant and saying, well, I'd really like to try the appetizer, and if I like it, then maybe I'll buy something off the menu. So I'm going to link to this as well because it's brilliant. But this is all the opposite end of the spectrum. I know we've spent most of the time talking about why free work is good. There are a lot of reasons to not take free work, and I think that video is the perfect example of how absurd our industry can be.
Yeah, well, I think that that's true of all creative industries, where it's easy to do those kind of spoofs where you go and you ask people to work for free, at restaurants and stuff like that, car dealerships, whatever it is. But it's not exactly fair, because there are instances where we're asking somebody to work for free in the case where they're getting something out of it does make sense. There are plenty of instances where if you want to be a chef, you could find yourself going to a kitchen and working for very low pay or no pay to learn some of these things. Or you can go off to culinary school and then go to a kitchen and be, low on the totem pole and work your way up. So, I do think that it's something that's easy to make fun of. And many cases it's deserving to be made fun of, because there are a lot of people who do exploit, the desire of young people to, learn a trade, whether it be filmmaking or whatever. But I just, I think that you got to look for those catchphrases, and you really have to judge the people, So obviously, if you read something that's like that thing that you read earlier, you're going to look at that and go, well, this is complete baloney. And if it's not baloney, it's baloney in the sense that I don't want to eat this. This is not healthy for me. So you just have to really be, on your guard. And if you're going to be working for free, which generally you're going to be doing early in your career, so you're young, you're right out of school, you haven't gone to school, and you need to, take care of yourself and make sure you make those right choices and understand, most importantly, why you're making those choices. And then everything else kind of melts away. And if you're honest with yourself and honest with everybody else around you, you're probably going to attract honest people. And you're going to see those red flags and know that, oh, this isn't one that I should go for. And when you do go for something and maybe there isn't a red flag, and you go to the meeting and you start feeling red flags when you're in the meeting, back away. You don't have to do it. That's really, I think, for me, the best thing anybody could take from this conversation is, if you're honest with yourself and you're honest with everybody around you, when you go into these interviews, just take stock of the situation and decide what's best for you. If you do that in your life, I promise you will be successful. Not everybody is trying to cheat you. Most people want something for themselves, and at the same time, if they can get that and help you at the same time, that's what makes most people happy. That's certainly how I have pushed forward in my career, and it's worked really well for me.
Well, I don't think I could cap it any better than that. So on that note, I want to be respectful of your time, and I want to let you get back to your life and all the fantastic work that you're doing. So thank you so much for being a return guest on the show, Mr. Alan Bell.
Always a pleasure, Zach.
Thank you for listening to episode 74 of the Fitness and Post podcast. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to access any of the resources discussed, visit our show notes at fitnessandpost.com/74. As a reminder, I've also created a bonus document to accompany this episode that serves as a guide to help you determine whether or not your next low or no paying job opportunity is right for you. You can download your free guide at fitnessandpost.com/74download. And if you'd like to become a beta member for my online course Move Yourself, enrollment will only be open from now until April 8th at midnight Pacific time. To learn more, just visit fitnessandpost.com/optimize. And if you happen to be listening to this after April 8th and you'd like more info, you can visit that same link to get yourself on the waiting list. Thank you for listening. Be well.